I can see a few people landing really quickly, which is nice. Nice to see you all coming in. 39. Can I check with the Secretariat? Is anyone else coming? 50. We've hit 50, 53. Geez. What a lovely way to start a Tuesday. 60, 64, 67. All right. I won't start until the numbers have stopped spiraling upwards, which is a good thing. 71, 72. This is a true story, and I know only those of you that are online can hear it, but once upon a time, if we had 20 people to a webinar, we would have been high-fiving ourselves. What have we just hit? 78. Awesome. 79. Have we still, what's it looking like in the stream of it, the admittance stream? 81. We're going to hit 82. If you're just coming in, I'm just counting the numbers going up as we're waiting for everyone to get into the room. 5. Awesome. How are we going for time? 32. I'm going to give it one more minute, you mob who are waiting, and then we'll kick off just while we're waiting for the stream. I reckon we've stabilised. 86. Talk too soon. All right. Going. I think we've stabilised. Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name's Catherine and I'm the CEO of SNAICC, just in case you've never met me before. And I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Paul Gray and Darcy Cavanagh and Craig Rigney, who'll join me as part of this presentation. As is normal, I'd like to acknowledge that I am sitting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of that great Kulin nation here in Naarm. I pay respect to their elders, past and present. I pay respect to all the rooms in which you're coming from and the nations of which you represent. It is awesome to see you. And I'd also say hello to any ancestors that decided to jump on the line for this particular conversation. Welcome to our very first lunchtime webinar of 2024. Absolutely fantastic to see so many of you here online with us today. Now, the last time I looked at the numbers, we'd hit over 86. So that's a fantastic showing. Well done. The purpose of today is to talk about the findings of the 2023 Family Matters Report and talking about the solutions that you as community have told us work in changing the tide of overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care. As I've mentioned, you're going to hear today from Dr. Paul Gray, who'll get into the details of the data, the report's trends over the past years, and in which states and territories we're seeing improvements and what those improvements look like. We're also going to be joined by Refocus in Queensland and KWY from South Australia. And these are both incredible Aboriginal organisations that work to reunify Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children with families and ensure that our children and families have access to the supports and services they need to do and that work for them. Darcy, just very quickly, can you tell us what you'll be presenting on? No, actually, Darcy's just had a technical problem, so we'll pause. Craig, just a quick overview of what you'll be talking to us about.
Good morning or good afternoon to everybody there. Look, I think I'll be talking a little bit about, I guess, the best practice, cultural versus clinical way in which KWY does their work, working with our mob and our families around keeping our kids or out of home care specifically, but also around reunification. And can I just say, sis, I'm loving the new hairdo. I'm loving it. And we had a great little yarn about it offline, and I promise I won't use that against you a bit later.
All right. So for those of you who weren't privy to that yarn, I did cut my hair off when the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children and Families Commissioner was announced, because that was one weight to take off my shoulders. The other reason I cut my hair off was because I'd had a couple of meetings in a row where the old aunties had said, "Oh, you poor thing, you're so busy, you don't even brush your hair." There was some truth in it, but I figured I was going to listen to what those old aunties were saying and buy myself a hair straightener and a hairdryer. Anyhow, Those are the things that keep us honest when we're working in this environment. So back to the business at hand. The Family Matters report. Now, I'm sure a lot of you online are familiar with it. If you're not, a little bit of the history to it. It's an annual report, and it was designed by SNAICC and our leadership groups to highlight, to really keep governments accountable. Before the report was announced, there was a complete opaqueness as to what the numbers of child removals genuinely looked like in states and territories where there was progress. So this particular report was designed to help keep governments accountable in a way that we've never had the ability to do before. It highlights progress towards achieving our goal that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people grow up safe, that they're cared for in their families, that they belong to their communities and they know their culture. Eliminating the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care within a generation is possible. And what we've aimed for in the Family Matters report is 2040, and it's a core part of achieving this goal. Each year since 2016, the Family Matters groups have told us that there is a continued story of children and families being affected by child protection systems around Australia. What we're hearing to this day, despite incredible policy levers, despite incredible gains, is that the story is getting worse. More of our children are being removed now than ever before. We know that it doesn't matter which part of the decision-making tree you look at in those child removals, the outcomes for our families are worse and more severe, and it gets worse the deeper you get into a decision-making process. So the highlights to that, and it's probably more like lowlights actually, there are currently 22,328 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care. Whenever I see that statistic, I think of my home, Alice Springs, which has a population base of 25,000 people. So that's almost the entire population. If you want a visualization of just how big that number is, the entire population of Alice Springs is about on par with those numbers. We also know that our children are 10.5 times more likely to be living in out-of-home care than non-Indigenous children. We know that our children make up 42.8% of the total number of children in out-of-home care. And yet our children are only 5.9% of all children in Australia. This representation is gross. While the report looks at how governments continue to disappoint us and our children, it also shines a bright light on how our children and families and communities remain safe and strong when they are connected to their families and their communities and their culture. What you'll hear today are about Aboriginal-led solutions to what is working best for our children and communities. We'll have case studies from Aboriginal community-controlled organisations that specialise in culturally safe wraparound supports. Now, these supports are supports that their own communities have identified as being necessary to ensuring that our children, like all children, have the opportunity to grow up healthy and strong in their family. The Family Matters report calls for investment in community-led solutions, and as you know, a National Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people to help eliminate the overrepresentation of our children in out-of-home care. In February this year, the federal government committed to establishing a National Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. We did it. This is a massive win for our children, our communities and our sector. Collectively, it's what we have been calling for many, many years. It is an accountability mechanism that holds all of us to account, but in particular shines a light on those very deep recesses that we've been unable to see. It is a mechanism that can work alongside governments to ensure that reform happens at the speed and scale it needs to happen at. But it is also a champion for our children and our families. It's that person that can bring forward what is different and what is so awesome about our families. And when I think about that, and I think about some of the stories that we see in media today, and very cognizant that what mainstream Australia understands about us, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, comes from the media, it isn't the story that we understand. And when I was growing up, everyone wanted to belong to an Aboriginal family because of our networks, because of our inclusivity, because there was always a stew on the stove and there was always a couch to sleep on if you needed it. Our National Commissioner will also play a vital role in bringing stories like that to the forefront. They will be vital to ensuring that we hold our governments to account and that we change the tide of overrepresentation. Our sector has consistently said that this is the most immediate and effective action that we could come up with, and we've done it. Again, it has been monumentous in getting to this point in time, and I think if you haven't been privy to the journey, and as most of mainstream Australia has, understanding how incredibly significant this role will be is probably going to take some time to explain. But effectively, and again, if you're not close to the story, effectively, this position will put us on the forefront of protecting children's rights internationally. Like it is an absolute game changer. Anyhow, I'm going to stop talking for a bit now and hand it over to Dr. Paul Gray, who's going to talk about the trends in the report and which jurisdictions are getting the most gains. Dr. Paul Gray.
Thanks, Catherine. And I've tried to be a little bit stats light, so we may have to dig into those into the Q&A rather than bore everyone with stats at the front end. But look, as a Wiradjuri man, I want to start by obviously acknowledging the country that we're dialing in from. Unusually for me, I'm dialing in from Wurundjeri country down here in Melbourne, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present for their ongoing custodianship of this country. I also want to acknowledge the Family Matters Leadership Group, who play a key role in guiding and shaping the family report each year. As Catherine mentioned, the Family Matters report puts a bright spotlight on systems and practice issues that contribute to the overrepresentation of our children in out-of-home care, elevating community solutions and celebrating action that keeps children together in families and connected to their culture. It is great to come together for this webinar to keep this conversation going, because Family Matters isn't just about a report, it's a conversation, it's a movement, elevating community advocacy and encouraging collaboration across the sector for substantive change for our children and our families. At the risk, though, of sounding repetitive, I continue to be struck by the apparent reluctance of governments to move beyond rhetoric, to move beyond commitments, and embrace the transformative change required from the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. Of governments to not just say that things will be different, but to actually do things differently. As we saw in January this year, the final report from the Productivity Commission review found that governments have not fully grasped the scale of the change required for system reform, the depth of that commitment through the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, including the priority reforms. Now, we all know Target 12 of the National Agreement is to reduce the rate of overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care by 45% by 2031. Now, new data, though, tells us that this target is not only not on track, it's getting worse. So governments must embrace the National Agreement if they are to change this difficult trajectory. But unfortunately, we still see more of the same top-down, disjointed government responses that have not only demonstrably failed, but compound the issues into the future. As I mentioned, the Productivity Commission's review of Closing the Gap Agreement made it clear that the solutions in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and our community-controlled organisations are not being supported effectively by governments. Rather, business as usual by government is delivering outcomes as usual for our children and our families. We continue to see, and certainly the Family Matters report talks about, the ongoing significant underinvestment in Aboriginal community-controlled solutions, despite consistent evidence that these are more likely to create sustainable change. The Family Matters report has also consistently highlighted year on year the need to see greater investment in prevention and family support. Yet still, nationally, only about 15 or 16% of child protection expenditure was spent on prevention and early intervention. This means that the majority of expenditure continues to be on an out-of-home care system, despite growing awareness and recognition of the harms associated with removal. Through Family Matters, we maintain a vigilant focus on the impact of these systems for our children and for our families, with a particular focus on elevating those community voices and holding governments to account on how well they implement key safeguards, such as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principle. Critically, the Family Matters report focuses on 4 key building blocks that emphasise the solutions to these challenges are in our communities. The building blocks guide action in creating the enabling environment for their implementation, including access to high quality, culturally safe supports delivered through our community-controlled organisations. We're going to hear from KWY a bit later about the work that they do in this space. That families and communities exercising control over the decisions that families and decisions should exercise control over the decisions that affect them. We're going to hear from Darcy a bit later on how they're actioning that. That laws, policies, and practice are culturally safe and responsive, and that governments and services are accountable to the communities they serve. Only by embracing the national agreement and the priority reforms and the Family Matters building blocks will we see a change in direction, and only then will we be able to see that we are on track for our kids. Now, there have been some small, slow steps. A key recommendation from Family Matters over a number of years has been the establishment of an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Commissioner in every jurisdiction, as well as nationally, with a clear mandate and authority to uphold and promote the rights and interests of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, consistent with international standards. As Catherine has mentioned, we have been successful in getting the federal government to commit to establishing a national commissioner. And this is a vital step towards building accountability at a national level. It is essential that this role is created to the highest standards for independent, empowered oversight. We call on all jurisdictions to review their own mechanisms for accountability and oversight when it comes to policies and practices that impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. We want to see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander commissioners with their own statutory authority in every jurisdiction to uphold and promote the rights of our children. And certainly, as someone from New South Wales, I can't help but be disappointed at our own state's lack of action on this important issue. We are also seeing increased commitment towards transitioning services and resources for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families back to their communities through community-controlled organisations. But as I noted before, commitments are relatively easy. We need to see them backed by urgent action. The first recommendation from the 2023 report addresses this by calling on governments to increase investment in prevention and early support programs delivered by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities exercising authority in decisions about our children is also a key necessary change. In jurisdictions where some authority has been transferred to community, we are seeing the beginnings of improved outcomes for our children's health and wellbeing, increased safety and sustainable restorations. And I'll pass over to Darcy in a minute to talk about some of this work. But again, these reforms need to be backed by government properly resourcing our communities. Recommendation 3 of the report calls on all governments to jointly develop an ongoing funding program for Aboriginal community-controlled integrated family supports. And a bit later, we'll hear from Craig Rigney from KWY to give us insights into their work in supporting children and families. We must invest in and advocate for Aboriginal-led solutions. Our services and our sector are proving work for communities. Family Matters provides the platform to share this evidence of how the strengths in our communities are working to turn the tide in overrepresentation. to acknowledge systems and practice changes that improve the circumstances for our children, families and communities, and to hold governments accountable for their action or inaction. Keeping the conversation going in webinars like this is critical, and I'm grateful for everyone joining us today, regularly coming together as a sector to share our learnings, our insights, our successes and our challenges is how we build strong advocacy that can push governments further. But I'm now delighted to pass over to Darcy, CEO of Refocus, to hear reflections on their valuable work.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's Darcy Cavanagh here, CEO of Refocus, and we're a community-controlled organisation based on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and cover the Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast, Gympie areas, and also a small portion of Cairns with the disability support services. So a little bit of sharing. So I've got two little question points that I thought I'd sort of share a little bit on in regards to delegation of authority for us at Refocus. We've been able to successfully take on DA as an early adopter site for the past coming up to 3 years. And in that space, it was myself at Refocus, and we had CQID and Rocky, Jason Fielder up there, and we were developing what does DA look like for Queensland and the early adopter site and what we need to do. So for us, it was a key focus is obviously reducing overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in care. And predominantly we were delivering family support services at the time and fostering kinship care as well. So we have a little bit of a wraparound and family participation program as well. So we have a wraparound of services there for us. So we already knew in the intervention support space that the more work that we could do with families, the better outcomes we have. And we knew that we had influence, or our staff had influence in decision-making for families in the statutory system. So we had influence on getting children home sooner than later, but also an ability to sort of reduce the, renewal of orders and extension of orders, and then also turning into long-term orders and stuff. So I think one of the questions was posed to me about how's Refocus adapting from being a support service into having statutory delegations. So adaptation for me, probably one of my key principles, I suppose, as I practice, the answer's never no. It's always a yes. Or no, not always a yes, but it's like, how do we make it a yes? And I suppose that's probably come from being the oldest child, the oldest child always gets what they want if you ask the younger people. And so that's one of the things that it's always my question is, okay, but why? I feel like a little 2-year-old sometimes, but why? Why do we do it that way? Why are you thinking that way? Why do we have to do it this way? Is there another way? And so then basically with that being always a yes, I think what I found in that is people challenging their own belief systems and understandings of why they practice a certain way. They're always erring to the caution and going, oh, I don't do that because I'm uncomfortable with that. Whereas actually getting a yes means people got to sit in their uncomfortabilities. So for me, as a CEO of an organisation and taking on these delegations, I had to sit in a space of there's a risk here. There's there is going to be some of the community risk that we may make decisions, and it's my name there that says that I don't agree to this decision maybe, or I recommend this decision, and then the community having a perception, like what's it going to impact on me in the community in which I live and I work here as well, and then my children and my family at the same time. So there's some of that stuff, but I had to challenge myself and go, I'm okay with the risk because I have faith in my team, that my team are actually really well with families. And the biggest thing for me too is that we have to make sure that we weren't, even though we're building a statutory system on the legislation within those delegations, we've got to keep it community controlled. And the biggest thing for me is that we don't lose what family is. And I think when I looked at child safety's practice and stuff, it was always heavily around risk. Whereas let's look at what this family structure is. What's the culture, not the ethnicity, but what's the culture of this family? What's their love language? What happens when everything falls apart? How do they come back together to structure support and rebuild each other, and who do they rely on. And so we know that really well as a community controlled agency working with their families, but it's about identifying the safeties and all of that and making it okay that there's going to be moments we're going to fall over, but we need support, and that's okay. And so how do we actually get family to reach out? Because that's a lot of the time too, sometimes our families are too scared to reach out. But so when I'm making decisions too, I have got to be mindful that it's not my standards and not my ideals of what I think a family should be, but it's actually looking at what that family's ideals are and making sure that they feel that this is how they deliver safety for their children and grow up strong community themselves. So growing a team is like one of the things that we have to adapting to that is like different roles, different risk management for us as well, and evaluations. So then that way we can evaluate risk, and if anything does happen, like one day we can always fall back onto, well, this is the reason why we made these decisions. And so when those children can go get freedom of information as well, that and look at their records, they can see the rationale around why we made these decisions for them. And then that we are accountable as workers to our people raising. We always acknowledge our future generations, our future elders. So when we're doing that acknowledgement, when we make practice decisions now, we've got to think about those young ones that are going to raise and look at our decision making. So I think that's a little bit about adapting as us, but I think there was a lot of self-challenge in that. And I think some of that question is around, was I the right CEO for this? And how big is this across the state? I think especially when we look at the scaling up across the state, because knowing that this was a trial site and then it's rolling out across the state, how it could work, it's how big is this going to be for our organisation that we don't lose the heart of our people. And we're not just duplicating a child protection system that's already in existence and just making it an Aboriginal label to it, but we're still practicing the same. So we've got to keep the heart of our organisation, the heart of our practices in place. And so that is really reflecting if I've got the right people in the right position, and that starts at me as well. And having the thought process too as a grow out is, some of us are going to probably think some areas may not want to do delegation of authority, but legislation has it that's the rights for our children. It's there. So does that mean the agencies that are willing to do it step into different areas to support those areas that don't want to take on delegation or don't have the capacity to because of the environment they're in maybe? But so that's future thinking for myself too, is like, where are we willing to grow as in support for those other organisations out there and for our children? And because my thing is, I have a sense of urgency that our children shouldn't have to wait. They've been waiting too long already. But so me, it's how fast can I go? But I also don't want to mess it up as I go. So I always think too about scaling up is, for us as an organisation, how much and what are we willing to support the brothers and sisters orgs that are coming up and rolling DA out for themselves? So already we've been a part with QWSIP and the peak body for Queensland to support them in how we did it, how we actually do the process internally, and we grow the conversation so they don't have to start from the beginning like we did, and making time in our org. So there's a little piece of me that sits there and goes, well, this is, someone made a really good statement actually at a meeting I was at the other week, and they said, this overrepresentation is actually child safety's issue. It's their problem. As then we come in and we're offering our advice and support like we have done all over the years, and we're getting good outcomes by transitioning this authority. However, the buying of our professionalism from the department, where is it? So here we've done this work, and here I am helping an organisation support them to step this up, but it's actually stepping it up for the department, and the consultation fees and the support fees hasn't been structured into that. But as a people, we always do that for a mob, and happy to do. So for me, I was in a little bit of a space of like, I think department needs to probably honour this a little bit and give some extra dollars maybe in a resource for that future development and support from agency to agency. Because as we're sister suburb over, brothers or sister organisations that are a couple of suburbs over, it makes sense for us to be together and share what we've done, because our families cross over boundaries all the time, move from one area to the other, and if the practices are all different, then delegation is going to look very different across everywhere, and it probably won't have the same strength and power that it should really be, it was intended for. So for us, it's also to looking at what does it look like for the future around, are we thinking too much in the box still? And it's really thinking about the things that we don't know. And so systems and structures. So right now we're looking at, with the department, they've worked really greatly with us at Refocus around how can they really shift their practices and resources over to us as a community-controlled organisation to actually support these children and families, and looking at memorandums of understanding and what it looks like for outposting of departmental staff over to community-controlled organisations. And so we've got one of those instruments happening at the moment, and really it's an action learning, because that instrument is actually a manager level over at Child Safety, and they come over with their delegations. So we're really mapping out what that really looks like for that. So because essentially then we get to practice under my management is all those delegations are actually in sight and under our support and recommendations as a community-controlled organisation. So that's a great thing. Instead of us only having, say, for example, 5 delegations and the department having 65 still, we now have potentially that we're working really closely together, that all those delegations are succinct and aligned, and nothing's getting overturned by, you know, departmental staff because it may not work for them. Not that that's happening at the moment. So, but yeah, so that's some of the stuff foresight moving forward and how we grow our orgs in that space. But that's a lot. I've got to wrap up. Let you fellas go. Hopefully I answered some stuff there for you.
Thank you, Darcy. In terms of the questions that have been coming through in relation to the work that you're doing, you pretty much answered all of them. And it's fantastic to hear from someone who is doing the work on the ground, because that's one of the questions we get asked all the time. Well, how does it look different? So being able to articulate that, put a story to it, put a face to it is incredibly valuable. One of the other stories that I like to share in any forum that I go into also comes out of Queensland, and it's moved towards delegated authority. And that story relates to a baby, and again, it's just putting a frame around what we're talking about, who'd been in care for, close to 2 years, and the organisation that it used to, that baby was, had authority for that particular baby, had never been able to find a family contact, never ever able to find a family contact. And when this particular baby was transferred over to an Aboriginal community controlled organisation who was familiar with that baby's environment, who knew their families, who are not threatening to their communities, within 2 weeks, 200 familial contacts, 200 people saying, we've been looking for this baby, we want this baby to come home. Completely different outcomes. Thank you, Darcy, for giving life and sharing these stories. Our next panellist is Craig Rigney from KWY, and he's going to talk to us about what they're doing in South Australia and how the landscape's changing in South Australia. Craig.
Thank you. Before I go any further, I would also like to acknowledge the lands that I'm coming from today. That is the lands of the Kavanagh people, and pay my respect to my elders and elders past and present and emerging. Look, it's really interesting to hear what Darcy was talking about. We're in a very similar situation where KWY now in South Australia is the second gazetted or ratio, which is a recognised Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander organisation with that statutory power. So I think I'll be reaching out to you, brother, to have a chat from your learnings, as well as chatting with Dan Mitchell, the CEO of AFS here in South Australia, around their learnings. And you know, I think it's really important to listen to people who have travelled this path before us from an organisational point of view as well, so we don't make the same mistakes, and together we can provide, you know, I guess that real clear and consistent responses that our community deserve and are seeking. I just wanted to, you know, touch base on that before I kind of do a deeper dive into South Australia. Look, from the Family Matters report, and I just want to really run past a couple of points that our, I guess, Aboriginal Commissioner for Children and Young People, April Laurie, and also the Guardian here, Shona Reid, pointed out I guess, in their review and their feedback to the Family Matters report from a state perspective. I just want to touch on a couple of points there. And both Paul and Darcy have also mentioned some real basic fundamentals as an ACO that we would always put first and foremost. But again, here we are having to look at a report, look at recommendations, gather as a national voice to put some basic stuff back on the table that we've had to do for generations upon generations. And sadly, we are seeing more and more Aboriginal children being removed and put into out-of-home care. And I guess, to start on that is, the real need for that Aboriginal family-led decision-making, family group conferencing. But also, April Laurie states that she would like to see this embedded and mandatory. And until that happens, to quote April, this is further going to perpetuate the status quo of families being kept out of the decision-making process. I would back that, and I absolutely would agree that we need more of that, and perhaps embed that in such a way that not only does it give our families the ability to put their voices forward and the voice of the child, but also it increases the work and the engagement with ACOs, and I think that's also very, very important. You heard what Darcy was talking about their ability and their growth, but also, Catherine just honed in on it beautifully there about something that Darcy said around when you get an ACO involved and we do things differently, that we immediately seem to grab this access point for community to touch base with us to get those outcomes and to find those families where we can either do placements or reunification for our Aboriginal children back with Aboriginal families. One of the statistics in South Australia is that what we have seen is we saw a reduction in non-Aboriginal children being placed. And of course, what we've seen is an increase in Aboriginal people being placed with non-Aboriginal families. So we want to turn that statistic around. And I think for us as an ACO and a RATCO, and I guess, from a cultural and moral obligation, we know what's going to work best for our families because they tell us. They tell us every single day. I think that's really important that we listen to that and to reflect on Darcy and Paul earlier. Our voice is often lost. When we're talking about children, when we're talking about parents or guardians and families and communities, right up to being an ACO, our voice is sometimes stifled and it's lost in the white noise. So I think the ability for us to have a united front and to have some leverage factors and some accountability built in through the Family Matters report, and of course closing the gap as well, is crucial for us as ACOs, but I think to really bring the voice of the children and our communities forward is absolutely crucial to the work that we do. What I want to do is just focus on, I guess, some positives for South Australia, and I think since the Family Matters report has come out, it's really important to look at that glass half full as much as we can. I have a strong belief as an individual, but also as a CEO, we absolutely have to acknowledge and look at the deficit, because that's the narrative there. But what I want to do is be able to change that narrative to talk about culture as a strength instead of culture as a risk. The minute we identify ourselves as an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, risk is perceived, and we go to this narrative, or certainly the system goes to a narrative of being an Aboriginal person in this country comes with a risk. I certainly don't believe that. I think, we're the oldest living continuous culture on the planet. We have, 80,000 years of resilience. So I think people maybe need to listen to working in the ways that Aboriginal people work to get better outcomes. So having said that, the glass half full, what we're slowly seeing in South Australia is that we do now have an SAPEAK body for Aboriginal children and young people being designed by Aboriginal community and with the department. So that's a huge step in the right direction. The Department of Child Protection here has engaged an Aboriginal Deputy CE, which is also a massive step to, I guess, bring a cultural lens to the department. We know that they're trying very hard in there. They are our partners, they are a stakeholder. And of course, they're governed by legislation within the system as well. So we can't always be kicking our, I guess, our government agencies and authorities from pillar to post. We need to work with them to highlight and show them and to teach them better ways of working with our mob. And I'm certainly happy to talk a little bit further about that in a moment. I think that particularly DCP and what they've been able to do in their Taikatina Warrior Pinthi team is to identify appropriate kinship placements. And I think that's really important. KWY are part of that in our Finding Families pilot with the Department of Child Protection. So we've got collaboration there where we're able to work with the Department of Child Protection around looking for, placing those children with families. And at the end of the day, that's what our goal is to really stem the flow of Aboriginal children into out-of-home care, and where we can place them with families and kin. That's got to be a huge factor and priority for us. We have also seen the Department of Human Services collaborating with KWY in the development of trauma-informed cultural responsive practice and training that we've been able to do run across the sector with Towndy and AFS. And of course, that comes with, I guess, those discussions around what best practice is and tools that we want to build and work alongside of DHS and DCP. We have we had a pilot which has now got some ongoing funding in our western suburbs here, which is most of our programs have been designed. Let me just say this up front. Most of our programs that we've designed by community, for community and with community were intervention or early intervention programs. But what we've seen is, in order for us to get a foot in the door and to try and work to slow down the flow of our kids into out-of-home care, we've been at the tertiary end. So we've been at that cliff edge. But we've had some great success stories doing that, and some evidence-based outcomes working with the evaluators around what that has also looked like. So for us, it is about collaborating. It's about Aboriginal ways of knowing and doing, and of course, being now a second gazetted organisation, or RATCO, as I mentioned earlier, will allow us to work and partner with the existing RATCO in AFS. I guess to help lessen the burden placed on their workforce, but more importantly, have some more of an Aboriginal lens and Aboriginal family decision-making and accountability and cultural accountability in those decisions that we can work with the departments on keeping our kids out of care. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, what we want to do here. And Shona Reid finished off in her report around transformational change is required, and this change will only be achieved if we continue to focus on efforts that will ensure Aboriginal people lead all aspects of child protection and families and the family support sector. Alongside that, those clear decision making and service delivery options have to be available. I think that's really important, that we can do our best to collaborate, to work together, and to get those outcomes that we know our families need and want and deserve, but also to be able to put the voices of the families on the table and make sure that we listen to those. Catherine, I might wrap up there and happy to discuss further issues or questions in the panel, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely okay, and thank you. And I was leaning into what you were talking about as culture as a strength, and what Shona had revealed in the need for transformational change. I might circle back to Paul now, because we are, while we know the statistics are still dark, there are spaces of great light. Paul, can you talk to us about some of the really promising changes in the trends at this moment in time?
Well, Catherine, I think we've touched on two really important ones already, and that is the the growing trend to see greater accountability across the system. And that's really important because it's those sorts of roles that are going to help us continually improve the experiences of children and families through child protection systems. And, you know, it wasn't that long ago that Victoria was the only jurisdiction that had some sort of independent oversight. And now we've seen lots more jurisdictions come on board. And certainly more recently, some of those jurisdictions really challenged themselves, and I hope some of the other jurisdictions, about the standards that they're setting, about the nature of that oversight. So we've got commissioners like Commissioner Laurie that have a really strong mandate in terms of how they do that. So I think the trend in accountability has been positive. And like Darcy mentioned, we have seen jurisdictions embracing this idea about how do we transfer the authority that is currently exercised by the state back to communities who know their children and their families best, and are best placed to make good, informed decisions about their children's futures. So we've seen more jurisdictions consider and implement some of those ideas, like Victoria and Queensland. And I know that others are kind of thinking about what that could look like for them. So I think those are two kind of broad structural pieces. Overall, too, we've seen the rates of entry to care generally decreasing. So year on year, we've seen fewer children overall, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children entering care, but that is also the case for Aboriginal children and young people, fewer entering care each year. That's a positive trend, although I will say that when we look at some of those statistics, we need to be really careful about what does that mean in terms of the change in the experience of the young person. How are other supports being put into place? And as I raised earlier, we aren't seeing a huge increase in family supports. And so that's something that we're keen to see more of. But yeah, those are three that come to the top of mind for me, Catherine.
Thank you, Paul. I think our next question will go back to Craig. Craig, the current legislative changes being considered by the department are a moving feast, but we know that they're potentially going to help ACOs like KWY. How will they work, and how do they ensure that children are growing up connected to their families and culture?
Wow, no pressure on me with that one. Thanks, Catherine. Look, I think the important thing here to remember, and I guess what we want to see with legislative change, and I think with what the Guardian and Shona and the Commissioner in April really want to bring forward here is, you know, really putting it simple, is what we want to be able to do is increase you know, the return of Aboriginal children to kinship, that connection to culture, to bring their voices to the table. And in doing so, you know, you need strong ACOs to do that, and to partner with strong NGOs that are working in this space as well. So our trusted partners, if you like, which also includes those government departments in education, DHS, DCP, etc. So I think the collaborative approach, the way first and foremost, but what we are wanting to see is that the strong Aboriginal voices coming through that decision-making lens. And again, what we've, you know, to reflect on what we're hearing as an ACO is people are being told what to do, and people are being told how to do it. Our families don't need that. Our families know exactly what to do, and they know exactly how to do it. So I think there's a huge power imbalance in our current systems, and what we need to do as an ACO is, I guess, alleviate some of that power imbalance. And I think what Paul was talking about earlier, you know, we're going to have a statutory responsibility, and Darcy mentioned this. That's okay. I think we just got to keep reflecting on ourselves around what does that mean from our legislative requirements versus our cultural requirements. and of course our good governance requirements as well. So I think putting all of those three things on the table at any given time, when we talk about cultural, we talk about clinical, we talk about governance, we talk about frameworks, we talk about legislation. I think knowledge is power, and I really think enabling and passing that knowledge on to our families is also very crucial. So they're not afraid of the system, and what the systems have done historically to our people is well documented. But let's empower our families. Let's share that knowledge. Let's arm them with that, so their voice, when they do have a voice, they are confident in that and that it means something. And what we want to see through this legislative reform is that we are able to do that in such a way that we are supportive of our families. And at the end of the day, there might be still some families and some children that may still need to be in out-of-home care for a short term, but let's not just flick to an 18-year order as part of our status quo response. I think the Aboriginal voice at the table needs to be loud and clear. And as I said earlier, that knowledge around what that looks like, I think, as you know, if we are smart enough and strategic enough, that's one thing. But I think let's just be honest and open and robust. We're a brave people. We're resilient, and I think we are very, very well placed to give that power back to our families when it is safe to do so.
Thank you, Craig. A strong Aboriginal voice coming through the delegated decision-making process. That's a really, I think that sits at the crux of everything that we're talking about today. And our next question really relates back to Darcy, who also touched on this, but he touched on it in a way that said, if we're really going to have a strong delegated voice coming through, then we need to be able to have the resources in place, and we need the funding that enables that to happen in a way that that can manage the scale and can manage the expertise. Looks like I was having a big chat to myself. I do apologise. I forgot to take myself off mute. But I wanted to pick up on the piece that Craig was speaking to when he talked about a strong Aboriginal voice coming through delegated authority. And again, if I connect that back to what Darcy was saying when he was saying, well, if we're going to have a strong delegated voice in Aboriginal authority, then we need appropriate funding, not funding as we understand it today. Darcy, can you talk to us a little bit about how that funding needs to change and how flexible it needs to change in order to get a true Aboriginal voice coming through?
And do you want a quick? Okay. I think true. So I think some of the stuff that we've worked with at the moment. Look, we've got to really do a model on what good outcomes are and how much it really costs. Because I think with our MOU coming over at the moment from the department that's working in our space, I think I heard a comment the other day identifying, like, not realizing how much work we actually do as an individual worker. And I think in the service, when I think about it, in your service centre, you're kind of pigeonholed into sort of, this is my role and this is what I do with the family. But in Aboriginal community controlled is that you become multiple things to that one family. And that's a big skill set to balance all of that. And we aren't just working with the worries and concerns that just initially come over on a case plan from the department. We actually are digging deep around why those behaviours happen, and we're actually going back to their moments of trauma where it was created a pattern of behaviour, and all to protect self, and or to, some of that fight and flight stuff. So you become more than you can. So how do you put a price on that? I think that's something that probably really needs to be evaluated and scaled. And tertiary education sometimes that isn't the skill set you require. Your lived experience and your own therapy is probably what benefits your practice, and then you're able to help that on the ground with individual people. So that costs a bit. I think what we have done really well, I think, up at the Sunshine Coast at the moment is really questioning with the department working around things. It's like, how can we do things differently? So we've been able to work out some of the fundings from the residential care funding areas, but we were able to bring in different parts of like the safe house elements into the I've got a blank now around when they call them, there's little service agreements where there's a little paragraph saying you can do this and do that. Forgotten what it's called. Anyways, so that allowed us to be more family focused. So we were able to have families come to one of our homes, and we weren't going to do residential because we don't believe residential works the way that it's structured. What we do believe is that family connection works, and community controlled organisations connecting with connecting people to a community actually works. So having families being able to come and stay in the home with 24-hour support worker to actually start role modeling what it is to nurture your children in those moments they have meltdowns. And, you know, we've got children that are actually broken from child protection being in the system, being removed, and they're coming back with their families. So they're dealing with issues. So how do we actually work with those families to do that together and be strengthened in it? So the flexibility around the funding is like, yeah, okay, you give us the guidelines, but give us generosity around flexibility around actually molding multiple areas to have that outcome in that area. So being able to allow us to count numbers for a period of time because it's actually benefiting that family. I won't go deep into how that all worked. I might get someone in trouble, but I must say, like, I really have. I think it's actually a mindset that the department people need to have as well, as around how can we make this do it differently, and not just stick to what we know. And I think that's at the moment we're a little bit sorry. I think I'm getting a bit off on your question, but we're sort of stuck a little bit because this is the budget. Here it is. This is what we've got to play with. I think that's great. I absolutely love that because let's play with it and make it happen. But still, it feels like we're running on a little bit of an oily rag. But I'm doing it because we're getting outcomes for our families. But for me, the future is what does it really look like? So I think the development of a formula of what this really looks like for funding in the future and the savings to the state, generational savings to the state, I think is something we need to do in that period of time. But right now, we've got creative minds, people willing to do these things and actually starting to give us evidence that doing it this way really works. Did I answer your question? I didn't put a dollar figure on that.
It was a community question, actually, and I think you did. I'm going to narrow in on the moulding, the ability to mould responses around an individual child and an individual family, and that might not necessarily sit in a couple of KPIs that we've developed somewhere. I'm also going to lean into creative minds, because you've all talked about that. You've all talked about creative solutions and thinking differently, because what we don't want to do is inherit a system that's inherently flawed. And again, it's something that comes to the forefront all the time. So simultaneously, while our Aboriginal community controlled organisations take these incredible steps, we know that some of the other conversation is around, okay, well, how do we deconstruct the system so that we're actually responding to the needs of our families as we understand it and promoting the strengths of our families. I am not going to speak for much longer because I know that we are out of time, but I am going to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Paul Gray for joining us, my co-chair of the Family Matters Report. Another huge thank you to Craig Rigney from KWY in South Australia, and of course, Darcy on the ground there in Queensland with Refocus. It's stories like yours that help frame how we turn the tide of overrepresentation of our children. It is hoped that one day we'll never have to come into rooms and have this conversation, but we'll be walking into these rooms to tell everyone how we did it. And that's what we're all aiming for. For any of you mob looking for more information on the Family Matters Report, I'm going to have to read this one out. Oh, okay, no, I don't have it listed, but you can go to our website and it is available for download. Please reach out at any time, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you.